The departure gate at Denver International Airport buzzed with the usual chaos of delayed flights and frustrated travelers. Gate B27 had become a temporary refuge for 180 passengers whose evening had taken an unexpected turn. What started as a routine Tuesday flight to Miami had transformed into something entirely different when a simple act of kindness between strangers would set in motion events that neither could have predicted. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Richard Martinez clutched his boarding pass, the first-class designation clearly printed in bold letters. Behind him, his 8-year-old daughter Emma tugged at his sleeve, her face pressed against the terminal window as she watched planes taxi across the tarmac in the distance. Richard had never imagined he'd be the type of father taking his daughter on spontaneous trips across the country. 6 months ago, his life had followed a predictable rhythm. Wake up, drop Emma at school, head to his job at the auto repair shop, pick her up, dinner, homework, bedtime. The routine had been their anchor after Emma's mother Sarah had walked out of their lives 2 years earlier, leaving behind only a note explaining that motherhood wasn't what she had expected. The first-class upgrade had been Emma's idea, though she didn't realize it at the time. 3 weeks earlier, she had come home from school with a science project assignment that required studying marine life. Her teacher, Mrs. Henderson, had suggested that students visit aquariums or marine centers if possible. Emma's eyes had lit up when she mentioned the Miami Seaquarium, and Richard had watched her excitement grow as she researched dolphins and sea turtles on his old laptop. Working double shifts at Rodriguez Auto Repair had been brutal, but Richard had managed to save enough for the trip. The first-class seats had been an impulse purchase, a moment of wanting to give Emma something special, something that might make up for all the birthday parties she'd missed, because he couldn't afford the gifts, all the school events where other kids had both parents cheering them on. Marcus Rodriguez, his boss and longtime friend, had been the one to finally convince him to take the time off. "You've been working yourself into the ground, man," Marcus had said, oil-stained hands gesturing toward the calendar on the shop wall. Emma needs her dad to be present, not just providing. The irony wasn't lost on Richard that he was about to board a plane to be more present with his daughter while sitting in seats that cost more than his monthly rent. But Emma had never been on a plane before, had never seen the ocean, had never experienced the kind of adventure that other kids seemed to take for granted. As they waited at the gate, Richard noticed the woman sitting alone 3 seats away. She appeared to be in her late 30s, professionally dressed, despite the casual travel day, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun that had begun to loosen during the long delay. What caught his attention wasn't her appearance, but the way she kept shifting in her seat, one hand pressed against her lower back, the other resting protectively over what was clearly a pregnant belly. The gate agent had announced the delay nearly an hour ago, mechanical issues that would require an aircraft swap. The replacement plane was smaller, which meant some passengers would need to be rebooked on tomorrow's flights. The stress in the terminal had grown palpable as business travelers frantically made phone calls and families with young children tried to manage increasingly restless kids. Emma had taken the delay in stride, pulling out the marine life book. They'd bought at the airport bookstore and quizzing Richard on different species of sharks. "Did you know that hammerhead sharks can see almost 360 degrees?" she asked, her voice carrying the enthusiasm that made all of Richard's sacrifices worthwhile. "I did not know that," Richard replied, though he was only half listening. His attention kept drifting to the pregnant woman, who had now stood up and was pacing slowly near the window. She moved with the careful deliberation of someone in discomfort, and Richard recognized the signs from Sarah's pregnancy with Emma. The woman's phone rang, and her conversation was impossible to ignore in the crowded gate area. I understand the board meeting was moved to tomorrow morning, Jennifer, but I'm still in Denver. No, the mechanical delay. I know how important this quarterly review is. Can we push it to the afternoon? She hung up and immediately dialed another number. Dr. Peterson, it's Victoria. I'm going to be late for tomorrow's appointment, the 2 p.m. Yes, I know it's the 32-week checkup. Can we reschedule for Thursday? Victoria. Richard filed the name away without really knowing why. There was something about her demeanor, professional yet vulnerable, clearly accustomed to being in control, but currently at the mercy of airline schedules and pregnancy fatigue. Emma had moved on to a chapter about sea turtles when the gate agent finally returned to the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, I have an update on Flight 847 to Miami. We have a replacement aircraft, but it's a smaller plane. We'll be boarding shortly, but I need to speak with passengers in seats 23C through 27F about rebooking options. A collective groan rose from the waiting area. Richard checked his boarding passes. They were safe in 3A and 3B, but he noticed Victoria checking her phone with increasing anxiety, and when she approached the gate counter, he could hear fragments of her conversation with the agent. I have to be in Miami tomorrow morning. There's no other flight tonight. Thursday is too late. The gate agent's expression was sympathetic but firm. Mom, I understand your situation, but we simply don't have space on tonight's flight. I can put you on the priority list for tomorrow's 6 a.m. departure. Victoria returned to her seat and Richard watched as she placed a protective hand over her belly, her professional composure beginning to crack. She made another phone call, this one shorter and more terse. The flight's been cancelled for me. No, I can't make the morning meeting. We'll have to postpone the announcement until I get back. Emma looked up from her book. Dad, why does that lady look sad? Richard glanced over at Victoria, who was now sitting with her head in her hands. Sometimes grown-ups have important things they need to do, and when plans change, it can be really stressful. Like when you had to work late and missed my school. Play? The comparison hit Richard harder than Emma probably intended. Yeah, kind of like that. But this felt different to Richard. Sarah's pregnancy had been difficult, especially toward the end. He remembered the constant discomfort, the way sitting for long periods became nearly impossible, the anxiety about every doctor's appointment. Victoria was clearly in her 3rd trimester, traveling alone, and now stranded. The boarding announcement interrupted his thoughts. We'll now begin boarding Flight 847 to Miami. First-class passengers and passengers needing extra assistance, please approach the gate. Richard gathered their carry-on bags and took Emma's hand. As they joined the short first-class line, he found himself directly behind Victoria, who was speaking quietly into her phone. Mom, I know. The baby's fine. It's just, this was supposed to be my last business trip before maternity leave. The Miami expansion has been my project for 18 months. She paused, listening to whoever was on the other end of the call. I know you warned me about traveling this late in the pregnancy, but the board insisted on an in-person presentation. No, David couldn't make it because of the Singapore conference. Richard had heard enough to understand that this wasn't just about missing a business meeting. This was about something much more significant, a project, a presentation, possibly. A career-defining moment that was slipping away because of airline logistics and pregnancy timing. Emma tugged at his sleeve. Dad, we're first class, right? That means we get the big seats? That's right, sweetheart. The big, comfortable seats with extra room. As they approached the gate agent, Richard made a decision that surprised even him. He had spent weeks looking forward to seeing Emma's face when she experienced first-class service for the first time. He had imagined her delight at the wider seats, the better food, the small luxuries that he'd never been able to provide. But standing behind Victoria, Listening to her quiet desperation as she tried to manage a career crisis while dealing with the physical challenges of late pregnancy, Richard realized that some things mattered more than first-class seats. "Excuse me," he said to the gate agent, stepping slightly out of line. "I have seats 3A and 3B. Is there any way I could speak with you about a possible change?" The gate agent looked confused. "Sir, you're in first class. Is there a problem with your seats?" Richard glanced back at Victoria, who was still on her phone, unaware of his conversation. Emma looked up at him with curious eyes. "No problem with the seats," Richard said. "But I was wondering if it might be possible to switch with someone who needs them more than we do." The gate agent's expression shifted from confusion to understanding as Richard nodded toward Victoria. "The pregnant lady? She's been bumped from tonight's flight." "I know, and I think she needs to get to Miami more than we need first-class seats." What happened next would change both their lives in ways that neither Richard nor Victoria could have anticipated. But in that moment, standing at gate B27 with his daughter's hand in his, Richard was simply thinking about doing the right thing for a stranger who needed help. The gate agent, whose name tag read Patricia Wells, stared at Richard with genuine surprise. In her 15 years working for the airline, she had witnessed countless acts of selfishness during travel disruptions, but rarely something like this. "Sir, let me make sure I understand correctly," Patricia said, lowering her voice. "You want to give up your first-class seats so that the pregnant passenger can travel tonight?" Richard nodded, acutely aware that Emma was listening to every word. "If that's possible, yes. She seems to have something really important in Miami tomorrow." Patricia glanced over at Victoria, who had finished her phone call and was now sitting, with her eyes closed, clearly exhausted. "The seats you're giving up are worth considerably more than economy seats. Are you certain about this?" "I'm certain." Emma looked up at her father with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. "Dad, what about the big seats you promised?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Richard knelt down to Emma's eye level, his hands gently holding her shoulders. "Sometimes, Emma, we have chances to help people who really need it. That lady over there is going to have a baby soon, and she has something very important to do in Miami tomorrow. The big seats would be much more comfortable for her than they would be for us." Emma processed this information with the serious consideration that 8-year-olds sometimes surprise adults with. "Will we still get to go to Miami and see the dolphins?" "Absolutely. We'll just sit in different seats on the plane." "Okay," Emma said simply. "Can we tell her about the dolphins? Maybe that will make her feel better." Patricia had been discreetly working on her computer while Richard spoke. "With Emma, Mr. Martinez, I can make this work. I'll move you and your daughter to seats 14A and 14B. They're economy, but I can ensure you get priority boarding and complimentary beverages. For the pregnant passenger, if she accepts, she'll get your first-class seats." "Perfect. I should mention," Patricia added, "this kind of gesture. It's not something we see very often. I'll make sure the crew knows what you've done." Richard was already walking toward Victoria before Patricia finished speaking. Emma stayed close beside him, still clutching her marine lifebook. Victoria looked up as they approached, her professional mask momentarily slipping to reveal the exhaustion underneath. "Excuse me," Richard said gently. "I couldn't help but overhear that you got bumped from tonight's flight." Victoria's response was cautious but polite. "Yes, unfortunately. Equipment change meant fewer seats." She paused, studying Richard's face. "I'm sorry. Do we know each other?" "No, we don't. I'm Richard Martinez, and this is my daughter, Emma. We're on tonight's flight to Miami." "Victoria Chen," she replied, instinctively extending her hand before remembering the current circumstances. "Nice to meet you both." Emma stepped forward with the confidence that only children possess. "Are you having a baby?" "Emma," Richard started to admonish, but Victoria smiled for the first time since they'd noticed her. I am. In about 8 weeks. That's so cool. We're going to Miami to see dolphins. Did you know dolphins are really smart and they can recognize themselves in mirrors? Victoria's smile widened. I did not know that. That's fascinating. Richard seized the opening. Victoria, I have a proposition for you. My daughter and I have first-class seats on tonight's flight. We'd like you to have them. The offer clearly caught Victoria off guard. I'm sorry, what? We heard you need to be in Miami tomorrow morning for something important. First class will be much more comfortable for you, especially... Richard gestured toward her pregnancy without being too direct. Victoria stared at him as if he'd spoken, in a foreign language. You want to give me your first-class seats? Why would you do that? Emma answered before Richard could respond. Because Dad says sometimes we can help people who really need help, and you look like you really need help. The blunt honesty of a child seemed to affect Victoria more than any adult explanation might have. Her eyes misted slightly, and she placed a protective hand over her belly. I can't accept that. Those seats must have cost you a considerable amount of money, Richard shrugged. Money's just money, but it sounds like whatever you have in Miami tomorrow is pretty important to you. It is, Victoria admitted quietly. It's probably the most important presentation of my career. Then you should be there, Richard said simply. The boarding process continued around them, with economy passengers now being called. Patricia approached, their small group with new boarding passes. Mrs. Chen, if you accept Mr. Martinez's generous offer, these are your new boarding passes for seats 3A and 3B. Mr. Martinez, these are yours for 14A and 14B. Victoria looked at the first-class boarding passes in Patricia's outstretched hand, then at Richard and Emma. I don't understand why you're doing this for a complete stranger. Maybe that's exactly why, Richard replied. Sometimes strangers are the ones who need help the most. Emma tugged at Victoria's sleeve gently. Plus, Dad says doing nice things makes you feel good inside. Victoria accepted the boarding passes with hands that trembled slightly. Thank you, I don't know how to thank you properly. Just enjoy the flight, Richard said, and good luck with your presentation tomorrow. As they parted ways, Victoria heading toward the first-class line and Richard and Emma joining the economy boarding queue, Emma looked up at her father with newfound respect. Dad, why didn't you tell her about your job? What do you mean? You didn't tell her you work really hard fixing cars to save money for our trip. Richard considered this, because this isn't about me, Emma. It's about helping someone who needs it. The flight itself proved to be an adventure for Emma, who had never experienced takeoff before. She pressed her face against the small economy window, watching Denver shrink below them, asking Richard a constant stream of questions about how planes worked, why her ears felt funny, and whether the dolphins in Miami would be blue like the ocean or gray, like in her book. Richard found himself more relaxed than he'd expected. The economy seats were cramped, and the service was minimal compared to what they would have experienced in first class, but Emma's excitement was infectious. She made friends with the flight attendant, a woman named Susan, who brought Emma extra pretzels and let her keep the small packet of wings that airlines gave to young flyers. During the flight, Richard caught glimpses of Victoria in first class. When he walked to the restroom, she appeared to be sleeping peacefully, finally able to stretch out properly. The sight filled him with a satisfaction that surprised him with its intensity. Dad, Emma said as they began their descent into Miami, do you think the lady will remember us? I don't know, sweetheart. But that's not really the point. What is the point? Richard thought carefully about his answer. The point is that we did something good because it was the right thing to do, not because we expected anything back. Miami International Airport bustled with late-night energy despite the hour. As they disembarked, Richard spotted Victoria ahead of them in the jetway, moving slowly but with obvious relief at having made the journey. She waited for them at the gate, despite having no obligation to do so. "Richard, Emma," she called out as they approached. "Hi," Emma waved enthusiastically. "How was first class? Did they give you warm cookies?" "They did," Victoria smiled, "and they were delicious. I saved one for you." She handed Emma a cookie wrapped in a cloth napkin. Emma's eyes widened with delight, and Richard felt touched by the gesture. "How are you feeling?" Richard asked Victoria. "Much better. I was able to sleep for most of the flight, which I desperately needed." She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. "Richard, what you did tonight, I've been thinking about it the entire flight." "You don't need to—" "Yes, I do," Victoria interrupted gently. "In my line of work, I encounter a lot of people who are looking for something in return for their kindness. But you asked for nothing. You didn't even tell me your last name until the gate agent said it." Richard shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "Like I said, it was just the right thing to do." Victoria reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. "I know you're here on vacation with Emma, but I'd like to stay in touch. What you did tonight reminded me that there are still genuinely good people in the world." Richard accepted the card politely, glancing at it briefly before tucking it into his wallet without really reading it. "Victoria Chen," the card said, followed by a title and company name that didn't immediately register in his tired mind. "Where are you staying in Miami?" Victoria asked. "We have a hotel near the airport tonight, then we're going to the Seaquarium tomorrow," Emma answered proudly. "And maybe the beach." "That sounds wonderful. I hope you both have a fantastic time." They parted ways at baggage claim, Victoria heading toward the taxi stand, while Richard and Emma waited for the hotel shuttle. As they stood in the warm Miami evening air, Emma looked up at her father. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." Richard knelt down to Emma's eye level, his hands gently holding her shoulders. "Sometimes, Emma, we have chances to help people who really need it. That lady over there is going to have a baby soon, and she has something very important to do in Miami tomorrow. The big seats would be much more comfortable for her than they would be for us." Emma processed this information with the serious consideration that 8-year-olds sometimes surprise adults with. "Will we still get to go to Miami and see the dolphins?" "Absolutely. We'll just sit in different seats on the plane." "Okay," Emma said simply. "Can we tell her about the dolphins? Maybe that will make her feel better." Patricia had been discreetly working on her computer while Richard spoke. "With Emma, Mr. Martinez, I can make this work. I'll move you and your daughter to seats 14A and 14B. They're economy, but I can ensure you get priority boarding and complimentary beverages. For the pregnant passenger, if she accepts, she'll get your first-class seats." "Perfect. I should mention," Patricia added, "this kind of gesture. It's not something we see very often. I'll make sure the crew knows what you've done." Richard was already walking toward Victoria before Patricia finished speaking. Emma stayed close beside him, still clutching her marine lifebook. Victoria looked up as they approached, her professional mask momentarily slipping to reveal the exhaustion underneath. "Excuse me," Richard said gently. "I couldn't help but overhear that you got bumped from tonight's flight." Victoria's response was cautious but polite. "Yes, unfortunately. Equipment change meant fewer seats." She paused, studying Richard's face. "I'm sorry. Do we know each other?" "No, we don't. I'm Richard Martinez, and this is my daughter, Emma. We're on tonight's flight to Miami." "Victoria Chen," she replied, instinctively extending her hand before remembering the current circumstances. "Nice to meet you both." Emma stepped forward with the confidence that only children possess. "Are you having a baby?" "Emma," Richard started to admonish, but Victoria smiled for the first time since they'd noticed her. "I am. In about 8 weeks. That's so cool. We're going to Miami to see dolphins. Did you know dolphins are really smart and they can recognize themselves in mirrors?" Victoria's smile widened. I did not know that. That's fascinating. Richard seized the opening. Victoria, I have a proposition for you. My daughter and I have first-class seats on tonight's flight. We'd like you to have them. The offer clearly caught Victoria off guard. I'm sorry, what? We heard you need to be in Miami tomorrow morning for something important. First class will be much more comfortable for you, especially... Richard gestured toward her pregnancy without being too direct. Victoria stared at him as if he'd spoken in a foreign language. You want to give me your first-class seats? Why would you do that? Emma answered before Richard could respond. Because Dad says sometimes we can help people who really need help, and you look like you really need help. The blunt honesty of a child seemed to affect Victoria more than any adult explanation might have. Her eyes misted slightly, and she placed a protective hand over her belly. I can't accept that. Those seats must have cost you a considerable amount of money, Richard shrugged. Money's just money, but it sounds like whatever you have in Miami tomorrow is pretty important to you. It is, Victoria admitted quietly. It's probably the most important presentation of my career. Then you should be there, Richard said simply. The boarding process continued around them, with economy passengers now being called. Patricia approached, their small group with new boarding passes. Mrs. Chen, if you accept Mr. Martinez's generous offer, these are your new boarding passes for seats 3A and 3B. Mr. Martinez, these are yours for 14A and 14B. Victoria looked at the first-class boarding passes in Patricia's outstretched hand, then at Richard and Emma. I don't understand why you're doing this for a complete stranger. Maybe that's exactly why, Richard replied. Sometimes strangers are the ones who need help the most. Emma tugged at Victoria's sleeve gently. Plus, Dad says doing nice things makes you feel good inside. Victoria accepted the boarding passes with hands that trembled slightly. Thank you, I don't know how to thank you properly. Just enjoy the flight, Richard said, and good luck with your presentation tomorrow. As they parted ways, Victoria heading toward the first-class line and Richard and Emma joining the economy boarding queue, Emma looked up at her father with newfound respect. Dad, why didn't you tell her about your job? What do you mean? You didn't tell her you work really hard fixing cars to save money for our trip. Richard considered this, because this isn't about me, Emma. It's about helping someone who needs it. The flight itself proved to be an adventure for Emma, who had never experienced takeoff before. She pressed her face against the small economy window, watching Denver shrink below them, asking Richard a constant stream of questions about how planes worked, why her ears felt funny, and whether the dolphins in Miami would be blue like the ocean or gray, like in her book. Richard found himself more relaxed than he'd expected. The economy seats were cramped, and the service was minimal compared to what they would have experienced in first class. But Emma's excitement was infectious. She made friends with the flight attendant, a woman named Susan, who brought Emma extra pretzels and let her keep the small packet of wings that airlines gave to young flyers. During the flight, Richard caught glimpses of Victoria in first class. When he walked to the restroom, she appeared to be sleeping peacefully, finally able to stretch out properly. The sight filled him with a satisfaction that surprised him with its intensity. Dad, Emma said as they began their descent into Miami, do you think the lady will remember us? I don't know, sweetheart. But that's not really the point. What is the point? Richard thought carefully about his answer. The point is that we did something good because it was the right thing to do, not because we expected anything back. Miami International Airport bustled with late-night energy despite the hour. As they disembarked, Richard spotted Victoria ahead of them in the jetway, moving slowly but with obvious relief at having made the journey. She waited for them at the gate, despite having no obligation to do so. Richard, Emma, she called out as they approached. Hi, Emma waved enthusiastically. How was first class? Did they give you warm cookies? They did, Victoria smiled. "And they were delicious. I saved one for you." She handed Emma a cookie wrapped in a cloth napkin. Emma's eyes widened with delight, and Richard felt touched by the gesture. "How are you feeling?" Richard asked Victoria. "Much better. I was able to sleep for most of the flight, which I desperately needed." She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. "Richard, what you did tonight. I've been thinking about it the entire flight." "You don't need to—" "Yes, I do," Victoria interrupted gently. "In my line of work, I encounter a lot of people who are looking for something in return for their kindness. But you asked for nothing. You didn't even tell me your last name until the gate agent said it." Richard shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "Like I said, it was just the right thing to do." Victoria reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. "I know you're here on vacation with Emma, but I'd like to stay in touch. What you did tonight reminded me that there are still genuinely good people in the world." Richard accepted the card politely, glancing at it briefly before tucking it into his wallet without really reading it. "Victoria Chen," the card said, followed by a title and company name that didn't immediately register in his tired mind. "Where are you staying in Miami?" Victoria asked. "We have a hotel near the airport tonight, then we're going to the Seaquarium tomorrow," Emma answered proudly. "And maybe the beach." "That sounds wonderful. I hope you both have a fantastic time." They parted ways at baggage claim, Victoria heading toward the taxi stand, while Richard and Emma waited for the hotel shuttle. As they stood in the warm Miami evening air, Emma looked up at her father. "Dad, I think you're the best dad in the whole world." "Why's that?" "Because you helped that lady even though it meant we didn't get the fancy seats." Richard knelt down and hugged Emma tightly. "You know what, Em? I think this trip is going to be even better than I planned." Neither Richard nor Emma had any idea how prophetic those words would prove to be. The business card in Richard's wallet represented more than just a grateful traveler's contact information. Victoria Chen wasn't. Simply another business passenger trying to make an important meeting, but those revelations would come later. For now, father and daughter climbed aboard the hotel shuttle, Emma chattering excitedly about dolphins and sea turtles, while Richard reflected on the unexpected turns that travel could take. The shuttle pulled away from the airport, carrying them toward their budget hotel and the adventure that awaited them in Miami. Behind them, Victoria Chen stepped into a taxi and gave the driver an address in downtown Miami, the corporate headquarters building, where in less than 12 hours she would be standing in front of a boardroom full of executives, delivering the presentation that would determine the future of her company's largest expansion project. The kindness of a stranger had made that presentation possible. What Victoria didn't yet know was how dramatically she would soon be able to return that kindness. The Miami Ocean View Inn wasn't the Ritz-Carlton, but it was clean, affordable, and most importantly to Emma, it had a pool shaped like a starfish. Their room on the third floor overlooked the parking lot rather than the ocean, but Emma pressed her face against the window anyway, convinced she could see water in the distance between the palm trees. "Dad, can we go swimming before breakfast?" Emma asked, already digging through their suitcase for her new swimsuit, a bright purple one-piece decorated with seahorses that Richard had bought specifically for this trip. "We'll see, sweetheart. Let's get some sleep first. We have a big day tomorrow." Richard tucked Emma into one of the twin beds, her marine life book spread open beside her pillow. She had insisted on reviewing dolphin facts one more time before sleep, determined to be an expert by the time they reached the Seaquarium. "Dad?" Emma's voice was drowsy but curious. "Do you think Victoria made it to her important meeting?" Richard glanced at the digital clock on the nightstand, 11:47 p.m. "I hope so. She seemed like it meant a lot to her. I liked her. She was nice even though she looked worried." Yeah, she was nice. Emma fell asleep clutching her book, and Richard found himself lying awake in the adjacent bed, staring at the ceiling. The events of the evening felt surreal now. He had given away first-class seats that had cost him nearly a month's wages to a woman he'd never met and would probably never see again. The logical part of his mind questioned the decision. That money could have covered Emma's school supplies for the entire year, or paid for the dental work he'd been putting off, or contributed to the emergency fund that never seemed to grow no matter how many extra hours he worked. But the other part of his mind, the part that had watched Sarah walk away because she couldn't handle the responsibility of being a parent, felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Pride. Not the hollow pride of finishing a difficult repair, job, or managing to pay all the bills on time, but the deep satisfaction of knowing he had taught Emma something important about helping others. Across town, Victoria Chen stood in her corner office on the 32nd floor of the Meridian Tower, looking out at the Miami skyline. The building's corporate headquarters hummed with late-night energy as her team made final preparations for the morning's presentation. Victoria, the financial projections are loaded into the system, called Jennifer Walsh, her executive assistant, from across the open office space that had been transformed into a war room of charts, laptops, and coffee cups. And the Miami market analysis? Ready to go. David's team sent the final numbers from Singapore an hour ago. Victoria nodded, her hand unconsciously resting on her belly. The baby had been active during the flight, as if responding to her stress levels, but had finally settled down once she'd been able to stretch out in the first-class seat. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was preparing to present a multi-million-dollar expansion plan while thinking about an auto mechanic and his 8-year-old. A daughter who had given up luxury seats so she could be here. "Jennifer, do me a favor," Victoria said, turning away from the window. "Tomorrow after the presentation, I want you to help me with something." "Of course. What you need?" Victoria pulled Richard's face back into her memory, the genuine concern in his eyes, the way he had knelt down to explain the situation. To Emma, the complete absence of any expectation for recognition or reward. "I need to find someone." Meanwhile, Richard's phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. "Flight go okay? Emma is excited about the dolphins." Richard typed back quietly, trying not to wake Emma. "Long story. We'll tell you when we get back. Trip is off to an interesting start." Interesting good or interesting bad? Richard considered the question. Interesting good, I think. He set the phone aside and finally drifted off to sleep, unaware that 12 miles away, Victoria Chen was making decisions that would change his life forever. Morning in Miami arrived with bright sunshine streaming through their budget hotel curtains, and Emma bouncing on her bed with excitement that couldn't be contained by sleep. Dad, look outside. You can see the ocean from here if you stand on the chair." Richard opened his eyes to find Emma perched precariously on the room's single armchair, her face pressed against the glass. "Emma, get down from there before you fall." "But I can see it, it's so blue. And there are boats." Richard joined her at the window, lifting her safely down from the chair. She was right. If you angled just right and looked between the buildings, you could catch a glimpse of Biscayne Bay sparkling in the morning light. "All right, let's get ready. We've got dolphins to meet." The hotel's complimentary breakfast was basic but adequate. Powdered eggs, bacon that had seen better days, and toast that Emma declared crunchy in a good way. They sat at a small table near the window, Emma chattering non-stop about her plans for the day. First we see the dolphins, then the sea turtles, then maybe the sharks if they're not too scary. Then we can go to the beach and look for seashells, and then— "Slow down there, marine biologist," Richard laughed. "We have all day." Emma pulled out her book and began reading aloud about bottlenose dolphins, her pronunciation of scientific terms endearingly approximate but enthusiastic. Other guests in the breakfast area smiled at her excitement, and Richard felt that familiar surge of love for his daughter's unbridled curiosity about the world. His phone rang as they were finishing breakfast. The caller ID showed Marcus's name. "Hey, what's up?" Richard, man, I've got some weird news. You know that big repair job we quoted last week? The fleet maintenance contract for those corporate vehicles? Yeah, the one we figured we'd never get because we're too small? That's the one. Well, they called this morning. They want to meet with us next week to discuss terms. Richard frowned. The contract Marcus was referring to was massive, regular maintenance for a company's entire fleet of executive vehicles. It was the kind of job that could transform their small shop into something much bigger. Did they say why they chose us over the bigger shops? That's the weird part. The procurement manager said they received a recommendation from someone high up in the company. Wouldn't say who, just that someone vouched for our quality and integrity. Huh, that's unexpected. No kidding. Anyway, enjoy your vacation. We'll figure it out when you get back. Richard hung up, puzzled. He couldn't think of anyone he knew who had that kind of influence with a major corporation. Emma had finished her breakfast and was already putting on her small backpack, ready for their adventure. Ready, Dad? Ready. The Miami Seaquarium exceeded every expectation Emma had built up in her 8-year-old imagination. The dolphin show left her speechless with wonder, watching as the trainers worked with the animals in perfect harmony. During the sea turtle exhibit, she pressed her face against the glass, whispering questions to the ancient creatures gliding through the water. "Dad, do you think they're happy here?" she asked as they watched a group of sea turtles swimming in lazy circles. "I think they're well cared for," Richard replied carefully, "and they help teach people like you about how amazing ocean life is." "I want to be a marine biologist when I grow up," Emma announced with the certainty that only children possess. "That sounds like a wonderful plan." They spent the entire day at the aquarium, Emma absorbing every piece of information from every exhibit placard, asking questions of every staff member they encountered, and filling a small notebook with drawings of the animals they saw. As the afternoon wore on, Richard noticed Emma's energy beginning to flag. The excitement and walking had taken their toll, and she was leaning more heavily on his hand as they explored the final exhibits. "What do you say? We head back to the hotel and maybe visit that starfish pool?" Richard suggested. "Can we come back tomorrow?" "We'll see. Let's see how you feel after some rest." The taxi ride back to the hotel was quiet. Emma curled up against Richard's side, her notebook clutched in her small hands. The driver, a friendly man named Carlos, asked about their day, and smiled when Richard described Emma's fascination with marine life. "First time in Miami?" Carlos asked. "First time anywhere, really," Richard admitted. "This is kind of a big adventure for us." "That's beautiful, man. Family time is precious." As they pulled up to the hotel, Carlos turned around with a grin. "You know what? This ride's on me. Your little girl's excitement about those dolphins made my day." Richard tried to insist on paying, but Carlos waved him off. "Pass it forward, you know? Do something nice for someone else." The echo of his own actions from the previous night wasn't lost on Richard. As he and Emma walked into the hotel lobby, he felt a strange sense that events were aligning in ways he didn't quite understand. Emma perked up at the sight of the starfish-shaped pool, and within minutes she was splashing happily in the shallow end, practicing her swimming strokes and pretending to be a dolphin. Richard sat in a poolside chair, watching her play and thinking about the day. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Martinez, this is Victoria Chen from last night's flight. I hope you and Emma are enjoying Miami. I have something I'd like to discuss with you when convenient. Would you be available for a brief call this evening?" Richard stared at the message, surprised that Victoria had reached out. He typed back, "Hi, Victoria. Hope your presentation went well. I can talk after 8 p.m. when Emma's asleep." The response came quickly. "Perfect. The presentation went very well, thanks to you. Talk tonight." As Emma continued playing in the pool, chattering to herself about dolphins and sea creatures, Richard found himself wondering what Victoria Chen could possibly want to discuss. Their brief interaction at the airport had seemed like a closed chapter, a moment of kindness between strangers that would fade into memory. He had no idea that Victoria's presentation that morning had been more than just successful. It had been career-defining, resulting in board approval for the largest expansion project in her company's history. And he certainly had no idea that Victoria Chen wasn't just another business traveler, but the CEO of one of the most successful transportation companies in the country. The conversation planned for that evening would reveal truths that would transform Richard's understanding of the previous night's events and set in motion changes that would affect both his and Emma's futures in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. But for now, he was simply a father watching his daughter play in a starfish-shaped pool, grateful for the opportunity to give her this adventure, and unaware that the real adventure was just beginning. 8 o'clock came faster than Richard expected. Emma had fallen asleep almost immediately after their room service dinner, chicken tenders and fries that she declared almost as good as the ones at Mickey's diner back home. The excitement of the day, combined with the Florida sun and pool time, had drained her energy completely. Richard stepped out onto the small balcony attached to their room, closing the sliding door quietly behind him. The Miami evening was warm and humid, filled with the distant sounds of traffic and the occasional airplane passing overhead. He pulled out his phone and stared at Victoria's contact information for a moment before dialing. She answered on the second ring. "Richard, thank you for calling. How was your day at the Seaquarium?" Emma loved every minute of it. She's already planning to become a marine biologist. Richard paused, still unsure why Victoria wanted to speak with him. "How did your presentation go?" "Better than I could have hoped." Victoria's voice carried a lightness that hadn't been there the night before. "Richard, I owe you more than just gratitude for what you did last night. You don't owe me anything. I told you it was just the right thing to do. That's exactly why I'm calling." Victoria took a breath, and Richard could hear her organizing her thoughts. "Richard, I wasn't entirely honest with you about who I am." Richard felt a flutter of unease. "What do you mean?" "My full name is Victoria Chen Williams. I'm the CEO of Meridian Transportation Group." The name meant nothing to Richard initially, but Victoria continued before he could respond. "We're one of the largest transportation and logistics companies in the Southeast. We operate everything from corporate vehicle fleets to shipping coordination." Victoria paused. "To airline partnerships." Richard's mind began processing this information slowly. Airline partnerships. Richard, Meridian Transportation has contracts with most major airlines, including the one we flew on last night. We coordinate ground transportation, executive, our travel, corporate accounts. Victoria's voice grew more serious. "What I'm trying to tell you is that I'm not just someone who was grateful for your kindness. I'm someone who's in a position to do something meaningful about it." The balcony suddenly felt smaller. Richard gripped the railing, trying to understand what Victoria was telling him. "I don't understand what you're getting at." "This morning's presentation was about expanding Meridian's operations into Miami. It's a $30 million project that will create hundreds of jobs and establish us as the primary logistics coordinator for South Florida's corporate transportation needs." Victoria paused. "Because you made sure I was on that flight, because I was able to make that presentation. The board approved the project unanimously." Richard's head was spinning. "Victoria, that's incredible, but I still don't understand why you're telling me this." "Because I've been thinking about our conversation all day. You asked for nothing. You expected nothing. You helped a stranger because it was the right thing to do, even though it cost you something valuable." Victoria's voice grew more intense. "Do you know how rare that is in my world, Richard? I'm sure there are plenty of good people in business. There are good people, yes, but most of them want something in return, a favor, a connection, recognition, money. You wanted none of those things. Victoria paused again. I spent the morning in a boardroom full of executives worth millions of dollars, and not one of them would have done what you did last night. Richard didn't know how to respond to that. Richard, I looked you up today. The admission caught him off guard. You what? I had my assistant do some research. Richard Martinez, age 34, works at Rodriguez Auto Repair in Denver. Single father raising an 8-year-old daughter named Emma. No criminal record. Excellent credit despite modest income. Volunteers at Emma's school when his work schedule allows. Victoria's voice grew gentler. You're exactly who I thought. You were last night. Richard felt exposed and unsettled. Why would you investigate me? Because I wanted to understand who you really were before I made you an offer. What kind of offer? Victoria was quiet for a moment, and Richard could hear her moving around, perhaps pacing. Meridian Transportation Group is expanding rapidly. We need reliable, trustworthy people in key positions, people with integrity who understand what it means to put others first. Victoria's voice grew more businesslike. Richard, I'd like to offer you a position as Regional Fleet Supervisor for our Denver operations. Richard nearly dropped the phone. I'm sorry, what? The position would involve overseeing maintenance and coordination for our corporate vehicle, fleet, in the Denver metropolitan area. You'd be responsible for quality control, vendor relationships, and ensuring our clients receive the level of service that Meridian is known for. Victoria, I'm a mechanic. I fix cars in a small shop. I don't know anything about corporate fleet management. You know about maintaining vehicles to the highest standards. You know about treating people with respect and honesty. You know about putting service before profit. Victoria's voice grew more persuasive. Those are the qualities I need, Richard. The technical aspects can be taught. Richard's mind raced. What kind of position are we talking about? I mean, what would something like that? Richard, I want you to know that this offer exists because of who you are as a person, not just your professional qualifications. Meridian Transportation Group has built its reputation on integrity, service, and putting people first. Those aren't just corporate buzzwords for us. They're the values that drive every decision we make. I believe you embody those values naturally, and I'd be honored to have you as part of our team. Whatever you decide, thank you for reminding me why we do what we do. The personal touch made the decision more complex, not easier. This wasn't just about money or career advancement. It was about joining an organization that claimed to share his values, led by someone who had experienced his character firsthand. Miami Beach stretched out before them, like a postcard come to life. Emma's excitement returned in full force as she saw the endless expanse of white sand and turquoise water. She had never seen an ocean before, had never felt sand between her toes or heard the rhythmic crash of waves. "Dad, it's so big!" she exclaimed, running toward the water before Richard could even set down their beach bag. Richard followed more, slowly watching Emma's wonder as she experienced the ocean for the first time. She approached the waves cautiously at first, letting the water touch her toes before retreating with delighted squeals. Within minutes, she was wading in up to her knees, collecting shells and examining seaweed with the same intense curiosity she'd shown at the seaquarium. "Look, Dad, I found a conch shell, and look at this weird seaweed. It feels like rubber." Richard settled onto the sand, watching Emma explore. The beach was moderately crowded with families, couples, and tourists, but Emma seemed oblivious to everyone except the marine life she was discovering. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. "Hello? Mr. Martinez? This is Jennifer Walsh, Victoria Chen's assistant. I hope I'm not interrupting your vacation." "Not at all. I received the email this morning. Thank you for sending it so quickly." "Of course. Victoria asked me to follow up and see if you had any questions about the offer. and also to let you know that we'd be happy to arrange a visit to our Denver facility whenever convenient for you." Richard watched Emma carefully examining a piece of driftwood, turning it over in her hands like it was a precious artifact. "Jennifer, can I ask you something about the company culture? I know what the formal documents say, but what's it really like to work for Victoria?" Jennifer's response was immediate and enthusiastic. "Mr. Martinez, I've worked for a lot of executives in my career, and Victoria's genuinely different. She remembers the names of everyone's children. She sends handwritten notes when someone's family member is sick, and she's never asked anyone to do something she wouldn't do herself." "That sounds almost too good to be true," Jennifer laughed. "I understand the skepticism, but let me give you an example. Last year, we had a driver whose son was diagnosed with leukemia. The family was facing enormous medical bills, even with insurance. Victoria didn't just approve extended leave. She organized a company-wide fundraiser, matched all donations dollar for dollar, and personally drove the family to appointments when the father couldn't take time off." The story resonated with Richard's own experiences as a single parent navigating crises alone. "She sounds like a remarkable person to work for." "She is. And Mr. Martinez, I have to tell you, I've never seen Victoria as excited about a potential hire as she is about you. Whatever you did on that flight, it made a profound impression." After hanging up, Richard found himself more conflicted than ever. Everything he was learning about Meridian Transportation Group and Victoria's leadership style aligned with his values and aspirations. But accepting the offer would mean uprooting Emma from the only home she'd ever known, leaving behind the support system of friends and community they'd built in Denver. Emma ran up to him, her hands full of shells and her face glowing with excitement. "Dad, I want to live by the ocean someday. Can we move somewhere with a beach?" The question hit Richard like a physical blow. "What about Denver? What about your friends at school?" Emma considered this seriously. "I'd miss my friends, but think about how much I could learn living near the ocean. I could study marine life every day, not just in books." Her innocent enthusiasm highlighted the central conflict Richard was facing. Emma's dreams were bigger than what Denver could offer. Her curiosity about the world deserved to be nurtured with resources and opportunities that his current situation couldn't provide. That afternoon, they visited the Miami Science Museum, where Emma's fascination with marine biology expanded into broader scientific curiosity. She spent 2 hours in the aquarium section, another hour in the planetarium, and emerged with a notebook full of new questions and observations. "Dad, did you know that some fish can change from male to female, and that octopuses have 3 hearts? And that the deepest parts of the ocean are still mostly unexplored?" Richard smiled at her enthusiasm, but his mind kept returning to Victoria's offer. With the kind of salary and benefits Meridian was offering, Emma could attend the best schools, have access to summer programs, visit museums and aquariums regularly instead of once in a lifetime. That evening, they sat on their hotel room balcony, sharing a pizza while Emma drew pictures of everything she'd seen during their Miami adventure. The drawings showed remarkable detail and creativity. Dolphins jumping through hoops, sea turtles swimming among coral reefs, shells arranged in scientific classifications. "Emma, can I ask you something serious?" She looked up from her drawing. "Sure, Dad. What would you think if we had to move away from Denver, like to a different city where I had a new job?" Emma's expression grew thoughtful. "Would it be a good job, one that made you happy?" "I think it might be. It would pay more money, which would mean we could do more things together. We could travel more, and you could take classes about marine biology, and we could live in a nicer place." "But what about Uncle Marcus and my friends at school?" Richard felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. "We'd visit Uncle Marcus, and you could make new friends." Emma was quiet for a long moment, her crayon poised over her drawing. "Dad, When you helped that lady on the airplane, did you think it would change things for us? The question surprised him with its perceptiveness. No, sweetheart, I just thought it was the right thing to do. But it did change things, didn't it? Richard nodded. It might change things. We won't know until we decide what to do about it. Emma returned to her drawing, adding careful details to a sea turtle's shell. I think good things happen when you do good things. Maybe not right away, but eventually. Her simple wisdom crystallized something that had been troubling Richard since Victoria's phone call. He had been so focused on the practical implications of the job offer that he'd lost sight of its emotional significance. Victoria wasn't just offering him employment. She was validating his belief that kindness and integrity mattered in the world. Whether he took the job or not, that validation was valuable. It meant he was raising Emma with the right values, teaching her that character mattered more than personal gain. Dad, if we moved somewhere new, could we still help people who need help? Absolutely, that's something we can do anywhere. Emma smiled and returned to her drawing. Then I think we should think about it really carefully and then decide what feels right in our hearts. Richard looked at his 8-year-old daughter with newfound respect. Somehow, without any of the adult complications he'd been wrestling with, she had identified the core question. Not what was most profitable or practical, but what felt right. That night, after Emma had fallen asleep, Richard stepped out onto the balcony again and called Victoria directly. She answered on the first ring as if she'd been waiting. Richard, how are you processing everything? It's a lot to consider, he admitted. Victoria, can I ask you something honestly? Of course. If I take this job, will I be able to maintain the values that made you want to hire me in the first place? Or will corporate pressures eventually compromise who I am? Victoria was quiet for a moment. Richard, that's the most important question you could ask, and it deserves an honest answer. She paused, and Richard could hear her organizing her thoughts. The business world can be challenging. There will be pressure to cut corners, to prioritize profits over people, to make decisions that might conflict with your values. Victoria's voice grew more intense, but that's exactly why I need people like you in leadership positions, to remind me and everyone else what really matters, to ensure that Meridian stays true to its principles even as we grow. What if I fail? What if I'm not qualified for this level of responsibility? Richard, qualification isn't just about technical knowledge. It's about character, work ethic, and the ability to make difficult decisions based on what's right rather than what's easy. Victoria's voice grew warmer. You've already proven you have those qualities. Everything else can be learned. After they hung up, Richard sat in the warm Miami evening, listening to the distant sounds of the city and thinking about the path that had led him to this moment. 24 hours ago, he had been a single father struggling to provide his daughter with a memorable vacation. Now he was contemplating a decision that could fundamentally alter the trajectory of both their lives. The answer, he realized, wasn't in weighing pros and cons or calculating financial benefits. The answer was in remembering why he had given up those first-class seats in the first place, because helping others was more important than personal comfort, because doing the right thing mattered more than personal gain. Victoria's offer represented the same principle, just on a larger scale. She was asking him to help build something meaningful, to be part of an organization that prioritized service and integrity. As Richard finally headed back inside, he realized that Emma had been right. Good things do happen when you do good things. Sometimes they happen in ways you never could have imagined. Their final day in Miami began with Emma's determination to see the sunrise over the ocean. She had read in one of her marine biology books that many sea creatures were most active during dawn hours, and she insisted they needed to witness this phenomenon firsthand. Richard found himself standing on Miami Beach at 6:30 a.m., watching his daughter search the shallow waters for signs of marine life, while the sky gradually transformed from deep purple to brilliant orange. The early morning beach was nearly empty except for a few joggers and one elderly man with a metal detector. "Dad, look," Emma called out, crouched over a tidal pool she'd discovered among the rocks. "There are tiny crabs hiding in here, and some kind of sea anemone." Richard approached the tidal pool, genuinely impressed by Emma's discovery. The small ecosystem contained several hermit crabs, sea anemones, and tiny fish that had been trapped by the receding tide. "This is like a miniature ocean," Emma said with wonder. "Everything's connected. The crabs eat the algae, the anemones filter the water, the fish clean up the scraps. It's a perfect system." Her observation struck Richard as profound. Emma had identified something fundamental about how healthy systems worked. Everything connected, everyone playing a role, mutual support, creating sustainability. It reminded him of Rodriguez Auto Repair, where he and Marcus had built a business based on trust, quality work, and genuine care for their customers. It also reminded him of what Victoria had described about Meridian Transportation Group, a company where individual integrity contributed to collective success. "Emma, do you think people can work together like that? Like the crabs and anemones?" Emma looked up from the tidal pool, considering the question seriously. "I think they can, but they have to want to. The sea creatures don't have a choice. They have to cooperate, or they die. People have to choose to cooperate." Her insight crystallized, something Richard had been struggling with. The job offer from Victoria wasn't just about personal advancement. It was about choosing to be part of a system that prioritized cooperation and mutual benefit over individual gain. They spent the morning exploring different sections of the beach, Emma documenting her findings in her notebook while Richard found himself making mental notes about her observations. Her scientific curiosity was remarkable for an 8-year-old. But more than that, her ability to see connections and patterns suggested a mind capable of significant achievement given the right opportunities. Around noon, they returned to the hotel to pack for their evening flight back to Denver. As Richard folded their clothes, his phone rang with a call from an unknown Colorado number. "Hello, Mr. Martinez. This is Dr. Sarah Patterson from Denver University's Marine Biology Department." Richard nearly dropped the phone. "I'm sorry, I think you have the wrong number. I'm not a student. Actually, I'm calling about your daughter, Emma. I received a very interesting call yesterday from Victoria Chen, who mentioned Emma's passion for marine biology and asked if our department offers any programs for gifted young students." Richard sank onto the hotel bed, stunned. "Victoria called you about Emma?" "She did. She explained that Emma is 8 years old, with a remarkable aptitude for marine science, and she wondered if we might have enrichment opportunities available." Dr. Patterson's voice was warm and enthusiastic. "Mr. Martinez, we actually have an excellent program called Future Marine Scientists that's designed for children ages 8 to 14 who show exceptional interest and ability in marine biology." "I've never heard of such a program. It's relatively new, funded by a grant from the National Science Foundation. Students attend weekend workshops, participate in field trips to aquariums and research facilities, and work with graduate student mentors on age-appropriate research projects." Dr. Patterson paused. "The program is completely free, including transportation and materials." Richard felt overwhelmed. "Why would Victoria contact you about this?" "She said she met Emma briefly and was impressed by her knowledge and curiosity. She wanted to ensure that Emma had access to educational opportunities that could nurture her interests." Dr. Patterson's voice grew more excited. "Mr. Martinez, if Emma is as passionate about marine biology as Ms. Chen described, this program could be transformative for her development." After hanging up, Richard stared at his phone in amazement. Victoria's thoughtfulness extended beyond the job offer to considering Emma's future independently. She had taken the time to research educational opportunities for a child she'd met, briefly, demonstrating a level of personal investment that went far beyond business networking. Emma emerged from the bathroom, her face glowing from the Florida sun despite Richard's diligent application of sunscreen. "Dad," who was on the phone, "you look surprised about something." Richard sat Emma down on the bed and explained Dr. Patterson's call, watching her eyes grow wide with excitement as he described the Future Marine Scientists program. "I could work with real marine biologists, like actually help with research. If you're accepted into the program, yes." Emma jumped up and began pacing around the small hotel room, her mind clearly racing with possibilities. "Dad, this is like a dream come true. Do you think Victoria told them about me because she remembered how much I loved talking about dolphins? I think she wanted to help you pursue your interests. She's really nice, isn't she? Not just regular nice, but special nice." Richard nodded, feeling the weight of Victoria's generosity settling over him. The job offer was significant, but this gesture toward Emma felt even more meaningful. Victoria had seen something in his daughter during their brief interaction and had taken concrete steps to nurture it. They spent their final hours in Miami at the hotel pool, where Emma practiced her swimming, while Richard wrestled with the decision that now felt more complex than ever. Victoria's actions demonstrated the kind of leadership and personal values that he wanted to be associated with, but accepting her offer would still mean significant changes and risks. His phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. "Richard, something weird happened today. Remember that corporate fleet contract I mentioned? The one where someone high up recommended us? Well, they came by the shop today for a preliminary inspection. Turns out the recommendation came from someone at Meridian Transportation Group. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" Richard stared at the message, pieces falling into place. Victoria hadn't just offered him a job. She had also taken steps to help Marcus and the auto shop. The corporate contract Marcus had mentioned was likely Victoria's way of ensuring that Rodriguez Auto Repair would thrive even if Richard decided to leave. He called Marcus immediately. "Richard, please, tell me you haven't been keeping secrets from me. Marcus, I need to tell you about something else that happened with Victoria Chen." Richard explained Victoria's identity and her connection to Meridian Transportation Group, watching the pieces click together for Marcus just as they had for him. "So, let me understand this," Marcus said slowly. "The woman you helped on the plane is not only offering you a corporate job, but she's also arranging for her company to give us a major contract." "It looks that way." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Richard, this woman is either an angel or she's got an agenda I don't understand. I think she's just someone who believes in paying kindness forward." "Well, if that's true, then she's trying to make sure everyone wins. You get a career opportunity, Emma gets educational programs, and the shop gets financial stability." Marcus paused. "That's not normal business behavior, my friend. I know. That's what makes this decision so difficult." "Difficult?" "Richard, this woman is bending over backwards to demonstrate that she's someone worth trusting. What more do you need?" Marcus's point resonated. Victoria's actions spoke louder than any corporate presentation or formal job offer could. She was demonstrating her values through concrete gestures that benefited everyone Richard cared about. That evening, as they waited at Miami International Airport for their flight back to Denver, Emma sat beside Richard reading her marine biology book while he scrolled through emails from Jennifer Walsh, containing details about relocating to Miami, school districts, housing assistance, and timeline flexibility. Every aspect of the transition had been thoughtfully planned. Meridian would cover all moving expenses, provide temporary housing until Richard found a permanent place, help Emma transfer schools mid-year without academic disruption, and even arrange for continued participation in the future marine scientists. Programmed through their Miami-based research partners. "Dad, are we going to move to Miami?" Emma asked without looking up from her book. "I don't know yet. What do you think about it?" Emma closed her book and looked around the bustling airport. "I like Miami. The ocean is amazing, and there's so much to learn here." She paused thoughtfully. "But I'd miss Uncle Marcus and my friends. Those are important things to consider." "Dad, can I tell you something I've been thinking about?" Richard nodded. "When we were at the tidal pool this morning, I was thinking about how the creatures there don't just survive. They help each other thrive. The crabs clean the anemones protect the crabs, the fish keep the water healthy for everyone." Emma's voice grew more serious. "I think maybe Victoria is offering us a chance to be part of something like that, where we can help other people while they help us." Richard stared at his daughter, amazed by her insight. "That's a very wise way to think about it. And Dad, I think the reason good things are happening to us is because you did something good first. Not because you expected good things back, but because it was right." Emma leaned against his shoulder. "Maybe that's how the world is supposed to work." As their flight was called for boarding, Richard realized that Emma had articulated what he'd been feeling, but couldn't express. Victoria's offer wasn't just about business. It was about creating connections based on shared values, building something sustainable through mutual support and genuine care for others. During the flight back to Denver, Emma fell asleep against his shoulder while Richard stared out the airplane window at the lights of cities passing below. Each light represented someone's life, someone's family, someone's dreams and struggles. He thought about the mechanic's life he'd built in Denver. Honest work, modest but sufficient income, a close-knit community of customers and friends who trusted him. It was a good life, but it was also limited in its scope and opportunities. Victoria's offer represented something different, a chance to impact more lives, to be part of decisions that affected hundreds of employees and thousands of customers, to model the kind of leadership that prioritized people over profits. But it also represented risk. Corporate environments could be unpredictable, and success wasn't guaranteed, regardless of good intentions. As the plane began its descent into Denver, Richard made his decision. He would accept Victoria's offer. The decision wasn't based on salary calculations or career advancement potential. It was based on recognition that Victoria had demonstrated through multiple actions that she shared his values and was committed to creating an organization where those values could thrive. More importantly, it was based on Emma's wisdom about tidal pools and cooperation, about doing good things because they were right, and about building systems where everyone could flourish. Victoria had offered them a chance to be part of something larger than themselves, while remaining true to who they were. That was an opportunity worth the risk. As the plane touched down in Denver, Richard gently woke Emma. "We're home, sweetheart." Emma opened her eyes and looked out the window at the familiar lights of Denver International Airport. "Dad, I know what we should do about Miami." "What's that?" "We should say yes, not because it's easy, but because it's right." Richard smiled, knowing that his 8-year-old daughter had just confirmed the most important decision of their lives. 6 months later, Richard stood in his corner office on the 15th floor of Meridian Transportation Group's Miami headquarters, looking out at the same skyline that had seemed so foreign during his first night in the city. The view had become familiar now, but it still filled him with a sense of accomplishment that sometimes felt surreal. The transition from Denver mechanic to regional fleet supervisor had been challenging in ways he hadn't anticipated. The technical aspects of fleet management had come naturally. After all, maintaining vehicles was maintaining vehicles, whether it was one car in a neighborhood garage or 300 corporate vehicles across South Florida, but the administrative responsibilities, budget management, and personnel coordination had required a steep learning curve. Victoria had been true to her word about providing support during the transition. Richard had been paired with mentor David Kim, a veteran supervisor who had patiently guided him through corporate protocols, budget software, and vendor negotiation strategies. More importantly, David had helped Richard understand how to maintain his personal values within a corporate structure without compromising either his integrity or his effectiveness. "Richard, you have 5 minutes before the quarterly review meeting," called Sandra Martinez, his administrative assistant. The shared surname had been a source of immediate connection when Richard had started, though they weren't related. Sandra had become invaluable in helping him navigate corporate procedures while maintaining the personal touch that had always characterized his work style. The quarterly review meeting represented a milestone Richard had been both anticipating and dreading. After 6 months in his position, his performance would be formally evaluated by Victoria and the executive team. The metrics looked good: customer satisfaction scores above industry standards, maintenance costs under budget, 0 safety incidents, and employee retention rates that exceeded company expectations. But Richard knew that corporate success wasn't always measured solely in numbers. The conference room on the 20th floor still intimidated Richard slightly, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Biscayne Bay and its polished mahogany table that could seat 20 executives. Today, the room was occupied by Victoria, David Kim, Chief Operating Officer Michael Torres, and Human Resources Director Lisa Chen. "Richard, please have a seat," Victoria said warmly, gesturing to the chair across from her. "Before we dive into the formal review, I want to say that the reports I've been receiving about your work have been consistently excellent." Michael Torres opened a tablet and began reading from Richard's performance summary. Customer satisfaction. Scores averaged 94.7%. which is the highest in the Southeast region. Maintenance costs running 12% under budget while maintaining quality standards. Employee satisfaction surveys showing unanimous positive responses about your leadership style. Lisa Chen added, "Your team members consistently praise your hands-on approach, your willingness to solve problems alongside them, and your fairness in handling scheduling and workload distribution. That's rare in management positions." Richard felt a surge of pride, but also a lingering uncertainty about whether his approach would be sustainable long-term. "However," Victoria continued, "numbers only tell part of the story. Richard, can you walk us through your philosophy of management and how it's influenced your results?" Richard had prepared for this question, but he decided to answer from the heart rather than from his notes. "When I was a mechanic, I learned that the best repairs happen when you understand the whole system, not just the broken part. Cars are complicated, but they're logical. If you treat each component with respect and understand how it connects to everything else, you can keep the whole machine running smoothly." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I've tried to apply that same principle to managing people. Each employee has their own strengths, challenges, and motivations. If I understand what makes each person function at their best, and if I help them see how their work connects to the bigger picture, then the whole team performs better." Victoria leaned forward, clearly engaged. "Can you give us a specific example?" "Last month, we had a situation where our dispatch coordinator, Maria Santos, was consistently missing deadline targets for vehicle deployments. The previous approach would have been progressive discipline, warnings, write-ups, eventually termination if performance didn't improve." Richard shifted in his chair, warming to the subject. "But I spent time with Maria, rode along on her routes, talked to her about what was happening. Turns out, She was trying to be too thorough with pre-deployment inspections because she was afraid of missing something important that could cause problems later. She was prioritizing quality over speed, which is actually admirable. "How did you resolve it?" Michael asked. "We restructured the workflow so that Maria could do her thorough inspections without holding up deployments. We added a quality control specialist position and promoted Maria into it, then hired someone else for dispatch coordination who was naturally faster at logistics but didn't have Maria's eye for detail." Lisa Chen smiled. "And the results?" "Deployment times improved by 23%. But more importantly, we caught 3 potential safety issues that the previous inspection process had missed." Maria's happiness with her work increased dramatically, and the new dispatch coordinator is thriving in a role that matches his strengths. Victoria nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the kind of leadership we want to see at Meridian. You didn't just solve a performance problem, you created a better system that utilized everyone's strengths." The formal review continued for another 30 minutes, covering budget management, vendor relationships, and strategic planning. Richard's performance exceeded expectations in every category, but what impressed the executive team most was his ability to achieve results while maintaining the company's stated values of integrity, service, and employee development. "Richard," Victoria said as the meeting concluded, "I have a proposition for you." Richard felt a familiar flutter of anticipation mixed with nervousness. "We're expanding our operations into the Caribbean, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Jamaica. It's a significant growth opportunity, but it will require someone who can establish our culture and values in new markets while adapting to different business environments." Victoria paused, studying Richard's reaction. "I'd like you to consider taking on the role of Caribbean Regional Director. It would mean overseeing multiple locations, significantly more responsibility, and yes, a substantial salary increase. But more than that, it would mean being instrumental in shaping how Meridian grows internationally." The offer was staggering. Regional Director was an executive-level position that would place Richard among the company's senior leadership team. The professional leap from auto mechanic to regional director in less than a year seemed almost impossible to comprehend. "Victoria, I'm honored by the offer, but I have to ask, am I really qualified for that level of responsibility?" "Richard, 6 months ago you asked me the same question about your current position. How do you feel about that now?" Richard considered the question honestly. "I feel like I've grown into the role, but I've also had excellent support and mentoring." "And you'd have the same support for this position. The difference is that this time you'd also be mentoring others, helping them develop the same leadership qualities you've demonstrated here." David Kim spoke up. "Richard, I've been with Meridian for 8 years and I've seen a lot of managers come and go. What you've accomplished in 6 months typically takes new hires 2 or 3 years to achieve. Your approach isn't just effective, it's scalable." That evening, Richard sat on the balcony of his Miami apartment, a spacious 2-bedroom unit, in a family-friendly complex with a pool and playground that Emma loved. She was inside working on homework, her marine biology books spread across the dining table alongside her regular school assignments. The transition to Miami had been easier for Emma than Richard had anticipated. She'd quickly made friends at her new school, excelled academically, and threw herself into the Future Marine Scientist program with enthusiasm that sometimes exhausted Richard just watching her. "Dad, can you help me with this math problem?" Emma called from inside. Richard joined her at the dining table, looking over her shoulder at the algebra worksheet that seemed advanced for a 4th grader. "Emma, this looks like high school math." "I know. Dr. Patterson says I need to understand advanced math if I want to do real marine biology research. She's been giving me extra problems to work on." Richard marveled at Emma's determination. The Future Marine Scientists program had connected her with Dr. Maria Santos, a different Maria Santos than his employee, who was a postdoctoral researcher studying coral reef ecosystems in the Caribbean. Emma had been assigned as Dr. Santos's junior research assistant, a position that involved data collection, basic analysis, and field trips to marine research stations. "How was your field trip to the research station today?" Richard asked, helping Emma work through the mathematical concepts. "Amazing! We collected water samples from different depths and measured oxygen levels, pH, and temperature. Dr. Santos says the data we're collecting will help understand how climate change is affecting coral reefs." Emma's excitement was infectious, but Richard also noticed how naturally she spoke about complex scientific concepts. The educational opportunities available in Miami, combined with her natural aptitude, were accelerating her development in ways that wouldn't have been possible in Denver. "Emma, can I ask you something about the job offer I received today?" She looked up from her math worksheet. "Another new job?" "Not exactly. A promotion within the same company, but it would mean even more responsibility and possibly some travel to other countries." Emma considered this seriously. "Would we have to move again?" "No, we'd stay in Miami, but I'd be away from home more often for business trips." "Dad, do you want the job?" Richard realized that Emma's direct question cut through all the complexity he'd been wrestling with. "I think I do. It's scary because it's such a big responsibility, but it's also exciting because I could help build something important." "Then you should take it. You're really good at helping people work together, and if more people need that kind of help, then you should help them." Her simple logic reminded him of her insights about tidal pools and cooperation. Emma had an intuitive understanding of systems and relationships that often surpassed adult analysis. "What about you? Are you happy here in Miami?" Emma gestured toward her marine biology books and research materials. "Dad, I'm learning things I never could have learned. In Denver, I have friends who love science as much as I do, and look." She pulled out a photograph from her backpack showing her standing next to Dr. Santos on a research boat, both wearing snorkeling gear and grinning at the camera. "Dr. Santos says I'm the youngest research assistant she's ever worked with, and that I might be able to co-author a real research paper when I'm in high school if I keep progressing at this rate." Richard stared at the photograph, seeing his daughter in a context he never could have imagined a year ago. Emma wasn't just pursuing her interests. She was excelling in an environment that challenged and supported her potential. "Emma, do you ever miss Denver?" "I miss Uncle Marcus and some of my friends, but Dad, this feels like where we're supposed to be, like we're part of something bigger and more important." That night, after Emma had gone to bed, Richard called Victoria. "I've made my decision about the Caribbean position," he said without preamble. "And I accept, but I have one condition." Victoria's voice carried a smile. "What's that?" "I want to make sure that every location we open prioritizes employee development the same way you've prioritized mine. I want to build teams where people can grow and succeed, not just complete tasks." "Richard, that's not a condition. That's exactly why I offered you the position." As they discussed details about the new role, timeline, and expectations, Richard reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. A simple act of kindness on an airplane had set in motion a series of events that had transformed not just his career, but his entire understanding of what was possible. But more than that, it had demonstrated how individual actions could create ripple effects that extended far beyond their original scope. His decision to help Victoria had benefited Emma, Marcus, the employees at Rodriguez Auto Repair, his current team in Miami, and soon employees across the Caribbean who would work in organizations built on principles of integrity and mutual support. "Victoria, Richard said as their conversation wound down. "I want you to know that everything that's happened, the job opportunity, Emma's educational programs, the success we've achieved, it all traces back to one airplane flight where you needed help. Richard, it traces back to one airplane flight where you chose to help. That choice revealed who you are as a person, and that's what created every opportunity that followed." After hanging up, Richard stood on his balcony looking out at the Miami skyline, thinking about how dramatically his life had changed. But the core of who he was, a father who wanted to provide for his daughter, a man who believed in treating people with respect and kindness, remained unchanged. The difference was that now he had a platform to express those values on a much larger scale, touching the lives of hundreds of employees and thousands of customers across multiple countries. Emma was right. This was where they were supposed to be, part of something bigger and more important than they could have imagined. And it had all started with giving up 2 first-class seats to help a stranger. Sometimes, Richard reflected, the most important journeys begin with the simplest acts of human kindness. 2 years had passed since Richard first stepped into that conference room as a nervous auto mechanic accepting an impossible opportunity. Now, as Caribbean Regional Director, he sat at the head of a different conference table in Meridian's newly constructed San Juan headquarters, surrounded by 12 department heads representing operations across 6 Caribbean nations. The transformation wasn't just personal, it was organizational. Under Richard's leadership, Meridian's Caribbean expansion had exceeded every projection Victoria's board had approved. More importantly, it had become a model for sustainable growth that prioritized employee development alongside profit margins. "The numbers from our Dominican Republic operation are remarkable," announced Carlos Rivera, the regional operations manager Richard had promoted from within 6 months earlier. Customer retention at 97%, employee satisfaction scores averaging 4.8 out of 5, and operational costs running 15% under regional industry standards. Round the table, similar reports emerged from Jamaica, Puerto Rico, Barbados, and Trinidad. Each location reflected the management philosophy Richard had developed: hire for character, train for skills, promote from within, and create systems where everyone's success contributed to collective achievement. Maria Gonzalez, the former dispatcher who now served as Quality Assurance Director for the entire Caribbean region, presented her quarterly analysis. "What continues to set us apart is our approach to problem solving. Instead of punitive measures for performance issues, we're identifying system improvements that prevent problems from recurring." Richard smiled, remembering the nervous woman who had struggled with dispatch timing 2 years earlier. Maria's transformation into a confident executive who spoke at industry conferences demonstrated the potential that existed within people when they were given appropriate support and opportunities. "Maria, can you walk everyone through the Jamaica situation from last month?" Richard asked. "It's a perfect example of our philosophy in action." Maria nodded, consulting her tablet. "We had a client in Kingston reporting consistent delays in executive transportation services. Traditional analysis would have focused on driver performance or vehicle maintenance issues. Instead, we discovered that our local traffic data wasn't accounting for construction projects and event schedules that significantly impacted travel times." She paused, engaging the group. "Rather than blaming our drivers or changing routes randomly, we partnered with local traffic management authorities and developed a predictive scheduling system that anticipates delays and adjusts pickup times accordingly." Carlos added, "The result was a 34% improvement in on-time performance, but more importantly, our drivers felt supported instead of criticized, and the client was impressed enough to expand their contract with us." These success stories had become routine in Richard's regional meetings, but they never failed to fill him with pride. Each example represented someone whose potential had been recognized and developed, someone whose work life had improved because of the culture they'd built together. Richard's phone buzzed with a message from Emma. "Dad, guess what? Dr. Santos says my research data from last summer contributed to a paper that just got published in Marine Biology Quarterly. I'm listed as a co-author, a real scientific publication." He couldn't suppress his grin as he read the message. Emma, now 11 years old and in 7th grade, had become something of a celebrity in Miami's marine science community. Her work with coral reef monitoring had progressed from basic data collection to sophisticated analysis that genuinely contributed to ongoing research. "Good news from home?" asked Dr. Patricia Williams, Meridian's newest addition as Director of Environmental Sustainability, a position created specifically to ensure their Caribbean expansion minimized environmental impact. "My daughter just became a published marine biologist," Richard said proudly, showing the message to the table. The response was immediate congratulations from his team, but also something more significant: genuine personal interest in his family. This wasn't corporate politeness. These were colleagues who had become friends, people who celebrated each other's successes because they'd built authentic relationships alongside professional ones. "Richard, before we adjourn," said James Mitchell, their legal affairs coordinator, "I wanted to update everyone on the scholarship program proposal. 6 months earlier, Richard had approached Victoria with an idea inspired by Emma's educational opportunities. If Meridian's success was built on developing human potential, why not extend that philosophy to the communities where they operated? The Meridian Future Leaders Scholarship Program has been approved by the board," James announced. "Starting next year, we'll provide full educational support for 50 students annually across our Caribbean locations. Students who demonstrate academic potential but lack financial resources to pursue higher education." The scholarship program represented more than corporate philanthropy. Recipients would be mentored by Meridian employees, offered internship opportunities, and given priority consideration for management training programs after graduation. It was a systematic approach to developing the next generation of leaders while strengthening the communities where Meridian operated. "The first scholarship recipient has already been selected," James continued with a smile. "Isabella Cruz, a 16-year-old from our San Juan operation whose mother works in our fleet maintenance department. Isabella has been accepted to MIT's engineering program, but couldn't afford tuition. The scholarship will cover her full expenses, and she'll work with our engineering team during summers." Richard felt that familiar surge of satisfaction that came from knowing their success was creating opportunities for others. Isabella's story reminded him of his own journey. Potential limited by financial circumstances until someone chose to invest in possibilities rather than just current reality. After the meeting concluded, Richard remained in the conference room reviewing quarterly reports while enjoying the view of San Juan Harbor through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The sight of cruise ships and cargo vessels reminded him of the interconnected nature of Caribbean commerce and Meridian's growing role in facilitating that commerce efficiently and ethically. Victoria entered the conference room quietly, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the relaxed smile that had become more frequent as Meridian's success had reduced the stress she'd carried during the early expansion phase. "How did the quarterly review go?" she asked, settling into the chair beside Richard rather than across from him. A change in their dynamic that reflected their evolution from CEO and employee to genuine colleagues. "Better than projected in every category, but more importantly, I think we're proving that sustainable business practices and employee development aren't just idealistic concepts. They're practical strategies that produce superior results." Victoria nodded, reviewing the reports Richard had been studying. The board is taking notice. Your Caribbean model is being considered for implementation in our European expansion next year. The European expansion represented Meridian's most ambitious growth plan yet, establishing operations in London, Amsterdam and Frankfurt within 18 months. The scope and complexity dwarfed even the Caribbean project. Victoria, are you offering me another promotion? Richard asked with a mixture of anticipation and exhaustion. I'm offering you a choice, Victoria replied carefully. The board wants you to lead the European expansion as Vice President of International Operations. It would mean relocating to London, significantly more responsibility, and a compensation package that reflects the executive level of the position. Richard stared out at the harbour, processing the magnitude of what Victoria was describing. Vice President of International Operations would make him one of Meridian's most senior executives, responsible for operations affecting thousands of employees across multiple continents. What about Emma? She's thriving in Miami, her research. Work is progressing beautifully, and she's built strong relationships with her mentors and friends. That's one of the considerations, Victoria acknowledged. London has excellent educational opportunities, and we have partnerships with marine research institutions throughout Europe. Emma could continue her research while experiencing a broader, international perspective. She paused, watching Richard's expression carefully. But Richard, this decision has to be right for both of you. Emma's development and happiness are just as important as professional opportunities. That evening, Richard sat with Emma on their apartment balcony, watching the sunset paint Miami's skyline in brilliant oranges and purples. Emma was working on a research proposal for a summer program with Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, an opportunity that had emerged from her published work and Dr. Santos's recommendations. Emma, I need to talk to you about something important. She looked up from her laptop, immediately sensing the seriousness in his tone. Victoria has offered me a promotion that would require us to move to London. Emma's eyes widened. London? England? Like across the ocean London? Yes. It would be a significant advancement in my career, but it would also mean leaving Miami, leaving your research programs here, starting over in a completely different country. Emma closed her laptop and gave the question the serious consideration it deserved. At 11, she had developed a thoughtfulness that sometimes surprised Richard with its maturity. Dad, would this job make you happy? I think it would be challenging and meaningful work. I'd be helping build something important on an even larger scale. What about me? Would there be opportunities for marine biology research in London? Richard smiled at her immediate focus on continuing her scientific work. Victoria says there are excellent research institutions throughout Europe, and London is a major centre for international marine science. Emma was quiet for several minutes, staring out at the Miami skyline they'd grown to love. Dad, do you remember what I said about tidal pools when we were in Miami that first time? About cooperation and systems working together? Yes, I've been thinking about that a lot lately, especially with my research work. Emma's voice grew, more confident. I think maybe we're supposed to help build these cooperative systems wherever they're needed most. She turned to face him directly. You helped build something good here in Miami and the Caribbean. If there are people in Europe who need that same kind of leadership, maybe that's where we're supposed to go next. Richard felt a surge of pride in his daughter's perspective. What about leaving your friends and Dr. Santos and your research projects here? I'll miss them. But Dad, if I'm going to be a marine biologist who studies global ocean systems, I probably need to understand oceans from different perspectives. Emma's excitement was building. Think about how much I could learn working with European researchers, studying different marine environments, and understanding how ocean systems connect across continents. Her enthusiasm was infectious, but Richard wanted to ensure she fully understood the implications. "Emma, this would be our third major move in 3 years. London is very different from Miami or Denver. The weather, the culture, the way of life. Everything would be new. Dad, every time we've moved, we've become better versions of ourselves. In Denver, you were a great mechanic, but you were limited by circumstances. In Miami, you became a leader who helps other people succeed. Maybe in London, you'll become something even more important." Her insight struck Richard profoundly. Emma was right. Each transition had revealed new aspects of their potential, created opportunities they couldn't have imagined from their previous circumstances. "What if I'm not qualified for this level of responsibility? Vice President of International Operations is a position I couldn't have dreamed of 3 years ago." Emma smiled with the confidence that only comes from having watched someone succeed beyond their own expectations. "Dad, 3 years ago you couldn't have dreamed of being Caribbean Regional Director either, but you didn't just succeed. You made everyone around you more successful too." She paused thoughtfully. "I think that's your superpower. You help people become the best versions of themselves." That night, after Emma had gone to bed, Richard called Victoria. "I've made my decision about London," he said, "and Emma and I accept the position. But I have some conditions." Victoria laughed. "Your conditions have always made our agreements better. What do you need?" "First, I want to ensure that every manager I hire and develop understands that our success depends on developing other people's potential, not just maximizing short-term profits." "Agreed. What else?" "I want to expand the scholarship program internationally. If we're going to operate in Europe, we should be creating educational opportunities for young people there too." "That's not just agreed. It's brilliant. The board will love the public relations value, and it aligns perfectly with our values." Richard took a deep breath before stating his final condition. "I want Emma to be able to maintain her research connections in Miami while developing new ones in Europe. Her scientific development shouldn't be compromised by my career advancement. Richard, I've already spoken with colleagues at Imperial College London and the Marine Biological Association in Plymouth. They're excited about the possibility of working with such a young but accomplished researcher." As they discussed logistics, timelines, and expectations, Richard reflected on the improbable journey that had brought him to this moment. A simple decision to help a pregnant stranger on an airplane had cascaded into opportunities that had transformed his entire life trajectory. But more than that, it had demonstrated how individual choices based on fundamental values could create systems that benefited everyone involved. His success at Meridian wasn't just personal achievement. It was proof that businesses could thrive by prioritizing human development, ethical practices, and genuine care for employee welfare. "Victoria," Richard said as their conversation concluded, "I want you to know that everything we've built together started with your decision to trust someone you barely knew with significant responsibility." "Richard, it started with your decision to help someone you didn't know at all, without expecting anything in return. That choice revealed your character, and character is the foundation of everything we've accomplished." 3 months later, Richard and Emma stood in the departure lounge at Miami International Airport, preparing to board a flight to London Heathrow. Their departure felt different from previous moves. Not like an escape from limitations, but like a natural progression toward greater opportunities to make a positive impact. Emma clutched a research proposal she developed in collaboration with Dr. Santos and her new European mentors, a comparative study of coral reef systems in the Caribbean and Mediterranean that would continue her work while expanding her global perspective. Richard carried a briefcase containing strategic plans for Meridian's European expansion, plans that prioritized sustainable growth, employee development, and community investment alongside traditional business metrics. As their flight was called for boarding, Richard realized they were carrying forward everything they'd learned about building systems where everyone could succeed. The principles that had transformed a small Caribbean transportation company would soon be applied on a European scale, creating opportunities for hundreds of new employees while demonstrating that ethical business practices weren't just morally superior, they were economically superior too. "Dad," Emma said as they approached the gate, "do you think we'll help someone on this flight too?" Richard smiled, remembering another flight 3 years earlier when helping a stranger had changed everything. "Emma, I think we're going to spend the rest of our lives helping people. That's what makes life meaningful." As they boarded the plane that would carry them toward their next adventure, Richard understood that the most important journeys weren't measured in miles traveled, but in lives touched, potential developed, and systems created that allowed everyone to flourish. The first-class seats he'd given up 3 years earlier had been returned to him multiplied 1,000-fold, not in luxury accommodations, but in the luxury of meaningful work, strong relationships, and the knowledge that his success was creating opportunities for others to succeed as well. 5 years after that fateful flight from Denver to Miami, Richard stood before an audience of 500 business leaders at the International Leadership Summit in London's Royal Albert Hall. As the keynote speaker, he was there to discuss transformational leadership in global organizations. But the story he was about to tell had never been shared publicly before. Emma, now 16 and a freshman at Cambridge University studying marine biology, sat in the front row. Her presence gave Richard the confidence to share the personal journey that had brought him to this moment as Vice President of International Operations for what had become one of Europe's most successful transportation companies. "Leadership isn't about the position you hold," Richard began, his voice carrying clearly through the historic venue. "It's about the choices you make when no one is watching and nothing is expected in return." He paused, looking out at the sea of executives, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who had gathered to hear insights about business success. 7 years ago, I was a single father working as an auto mechanic in Denver, Colorado. I had no corporate experience, no advanced education, and no connections in the business world. What I did have was an 8-year-old daughter who deserved better opportunities than my circumstances could provide. The audience was attentive, perhaps surprised by the humble beginning to what they expected would be a typical success story. Yes, the transformation of my life began with a simple decision on an airplane. A pregnant woman had been bumped from her flight due to equipment changes. She clearly needed to be somewhere important, and my daughter and I had first-class seats that would be much more comfortable for someone in her condition. Richard's eyes found Victoria in the audience, now serving as Meridian's chief executive, officer for European operations. She smiled encouragingly, having heard this story many times, but never in such a public setting. I gave her our seats, not because I expected anything in return, but because it was the right thing to do. That woman was Victoria Chen, and that flight was carrying her to the most important presentation of her career. A murmur of recognition rippled through the audience. Many knew Victoria's reputation as one of Europe's most innovative business leaders. What happened next changed both of our lives forever. Victoria offered me a job, not because of my qualifications on paper, but because of the character I had demonstrated through a simple act of kindness. Richard moved away from the podium, speaking more conversationally to the assembled leaders. "But this isn't really a story about one lucky break or one generous executive. It's about what happens when organizations prioritize human development over short-term profits, when leaders invest in people's potential rather than just their current productivity." He gestured toward a large screen that displayed Meridian's growth statistics over the past 7 years. Under Victoria's leadership, And through the principles we've developed together, Meridian has grown from a regional transportation company to an international corporation operating in 12 countries. But more importantly, we've maintained employee satisfaction rates above 90%, promoted 78% of our management positions from within, and created educational opportunities for over 2,000 young people through our scholarship programs. The numbers were impressive, but Richard could see that the audience was more interested in the human story behind the statistics. The key insight isn't that kindness pays dividends, although it does. The key insight is that sustainable success requires building systems where everyone's growth contributes to collective achievement. Emma watched her father with obvious pride, but also with the analytical mind of a young scientist. At 16, she had already published 3 research papers and was working on marine conservation projects that spanned multiple continents. My daughter Emma taught me something profound when she was 8 years old, studying tidal pools on Miami Beach. She observed that marine ecosystems thrive when each species contributes to the health of the whole system. The crabs, anemones, and fish don't just coexist, they actively support each other's survival and growth. Richard paused, allowing the metaphor to resonate. The same principle applies to organizations. When leaders create environments where individual success enhances collective success, where people are developed rather than just utilized, extraordinary things become possible. He shared specific examples from Meridian's operations. Maria Gonzalez's transformation from struggling dispatcher to regional quality director. Carlos Rivera's development from mechanic to operations manager. Isabella Cruz's journey from scholarship recipient to MIT engineering graduate, now working as Meridian's head of sustainable transportation design. Each of these success stories represents someone whose potential was recognized and nurtured. But more than that, each person's growth strengthened the entire organization. Richard's voice grew more passionate as he approached the core message of his presentation. Too many businesses operate on scarcity thinking, the belief that success is a limited resource, that helping others succeed somehow diminishes your own opportunities. But our experience has proven the opposite. When you invest genuinely in other people's development, when you create systems that reward cooperation over competition, everyone achieves more than they could individually. The audience was completely engaged now, many taking notes or recording. Key points. This isn't idealistic thinking, it's a practical strategy. Organizations built on mutual support and shared success are more innovative, more resilient, more adaptable to changing market conditions, and ultimately more profitable than those built on traditional hierarchical models. Richard returned to the podium for his conclusion. 7 years ago, I thought success meant being able to provide basic necessities for my daughter. Today, Emma is conducting marine research that contributes to global conservation efforts, and I lead operations that employ thousands of people across multiple continents. He looked directly at Emma, his voice growing softer but no less compelling. But the real measure of our success isn't the positions we hold or the recognition we receive. It's the opportunities we've created for others, the systems we've built that will continue benefiting people long after we're gone, the proof we've provided that businesses can thrive by prioritizing human development. Richard's final words carried the weight of 7 years of experience and transformation. Leadership begins with a choice to help someone else succeed, even when there's no obvious benefit to yourself. Everything meaningful that follows grows, from that fundamental commitment to serving others. The standing ovation lasted for several minutes, but Richard was focused on Emma's reaction. She was applauding enthusiastically, but more than that, she was smiling with the satisfaction of someone who had witnessed principles she'd learned as a child, validated on an international stage. After the presentation, Richard was surrounded by business leaders wanting to discuss implementation strategies, partnership opportunities, and consulting arrangements. But his first priority was connecting with Emma and Victoria. "Dad, that was incredible," Emma said, embracing him warmly. "You made business leadership sound like marine conservation. Everything connected, everyone contributing to the health of the whole system." Victoria joined them, her expression reflecting both professional pride and personal satisfaction. "Richard, I've been thinking about that flight for 7 years, and I finally understand what made your gesture so powerful. You saw a problem and took action without calculating costs or benefits. That's still how you approach leadership today." As the three of them walked through the streets of London toward their dinner reservation, Richard reflected on the improbable journey that had brought them together. The auto mechanic, the pregnant executive, and the curious 8-year-old had become a business leader, a CEO, and a promising young scientist. But more than their individual transformations, they had created something larger, a model for how organizations could operate ethically while achieving extraordinary success, a demonstration that helping others was not just morally right, but strategically smart. "Victoria," Richard said as they entered the restaurant, "I have an idea for our next project." "What's that?" "A leadership institute. Not just for Meridian employees, but for business leaders across industries who want to learn how to build organizations where everyone can flourish." Emma looked up from her phone, where she'd been reviewing messages from her research colleagues around the world. "Dad, that sounds like creating an educational ecosystem for business leaders, like a tidal pool, but for corporate development." Victoria laughed at Emma's characteristically scientific perspective, but her expression grew serious as she considered Richard's proposal. "A leadership institute based on the principles we've developed, teaching sustainable success through human development. I love it." As they settled into their dinner conversation, planning the next phase of their mission to transform how businesses operate, Richard realized that the story that had begun with giving up first-class seats was far from over. Emma would continue her marine research, probably making discoveries that contributed to global conservation efforts. Victoria would keep building Meridian into a model for ethical international business, and Richard would keep finding new ways to demonstrate that success built on helping others wasn't just possible. It was the only kind of success that truly mattered. The first-class seats he'd given up 7 years earlier had become something infinitely more valuable. A first-class life built on first-class principles, creating first-class opportunities for everyone whose path they crossed. Sometimes, the most important journeys begin with the simplest acts of human kindness. And sometimes those journeys never really end. They just keep expanding, touching more lives, creating more possibilities, proving again and again that doing the right thing isn't just right. It's smart, it's profitable, and it's the foundation of everything worth building. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.